lines, but it's all about stats and statistics and the growth of malware. And most of the time, we see slides like this come up, and we kind of go, well, what does this actually mean? And I would argue that cybersecurity is the most important topic, not only for your business, but actually for our entire society. Because we've seen the impact that it has on our lives. In fact, in 2017, we heard about this thing called WannaCry, and the impact that it had on life and death, because hospitals all across the United Kingdom were no longer functioning. And I saw this actually with my own eyes at Hammersmith Hospital. I was visiting somebody that was due for surgery just 3 days later, and they'd switched off the internet. Now, that may not sound such a big deal because other people were having operations being postponed. But sometimes when you're in a hospital 24 hours a day, access to the internet really is your only connection to the outside world. And if we start to look at the metrics, if we start to try to determine the cost that this actually has on all of us, this is a cost on innovation. In Germany, for example, and actually, ironically, Germany has the highest loss of cybercrime anywhere in the world, not because they're the most popular, but because they're one of the few countries that actually measure the economic impact that it has. And you think about it, 1.6% GDP, that is an absolutely dramatic number that can actually be the difference between success and failure for businesses like yourselves. Now, from a personal perspective, I actually saw the impact that misinformation can have. In other words, cybersecurity can have. And for those of you, most of you in the UK now, the number one overriding topic we have is Brexit. And I remember the morning of Brexit, well, actually the night before, I go to sleep safe in the knowledge that we're going to be staying in the European Union. And when you wake up in the morning, I'm absolutely shocked that actually we've decided to leave. And part of me began to question, is that my lack of understanding on the underlying resentment that the general population had? And from a few months, I began to question whether I need to keep a wider variety of friends. And it's only really, I would say, in the last maybe year or two that we began to do research and we began to look into the reasons why people began to vote in this way. And we began to realize that that small swing could well, and more than likely, have been influenced by a third party. You think about this, my kids aren't going to be able to get a job maybe in London working at one of the large financial institutions because they've left. And the reason they've left is because, potentially, of a cybersecurity related issue, the integrity of information. So when we talk about cybersecurity, it's not about bits and bytes and growth of malware. It's actually a lot deeper than that. And whether it's the Brexit vote or whether it's your ability to be able to get an appointment at the hospital, we rely on information so much and we take it for granted that that information is available and it's accurate. And failure to address this technical issue called cybersecurity means it has far-reaching repercussions. And so, if we look at the broader world around us, we've heard the saying that information is the new oil. And it's incredible to think that companies like WhatsApp sell for $19 billion and actually don't really turn over much profit. The world has changed so much that information and the collation of information is now absolutely critical. And to give you a real-life example, and the most recent example, if I was to ask you whether I could take a photograph of you, you might say no. In fact, I can bet your bottom dollar if I was a Russian company and said, can I take a photograph of you, you certainly would say no. But if I promised to show you an app that will make you look older, you'd probably allow me to take a photo of you. And the reality is companies today are collating swathes of information about all of us. And we as a society are just allowing that to happen. And the concept of privacy, people tell me that the younger generation don't care about privacy, and I would argue that's completely not the case. And for those of you that are Facebook users, and for those of you that were Facebook users, you saw an entire campaign of people so angry at the point that we were being manipulated by a third-party company to try to understand our vote. And actually, the anger got so visceral that, as you can see, there was a campaign on social media, ironically not on Facebook, but actually on Twitter, where the delete Facebook campaign or hashtag was actually privacy when they understand what's being presented in front of them. And organizations that don't address the preservation of personal data correctly and ethically and morally, they'll be burned. And so all of what I've talked about today is things that you have control over. You can decide whether you want to use Facebook. You can decide whether you want to share your personal data. In fact, I was at Westfield Shopping Centre a little while back, and I saw people trading their personal data for chocolate, which is okay if you love chocolate that much. Give away your personal data. But the reality is that our homes today, which was actually the only bastion of privacy we had, are no longer private domain. In fact, in many occasions, you don't even have a choice as to whether you give up your privacy. And if I asked this audience 5 years ago, how many IoT devices do you have in your home? My guess is it's probably 5 to 10 devices. Today, the average will probably hit 50 to 60 devices. And each and every single one of these devices that you put in your home, they collect information about you. And in some cases, you have a choice. You can decide to put a digital assistant in your home and allow that microphone to be always on and listening to what you and your family talk about. That's your decision. But in some cases, these devices are coming into our home from different areas. Now, this is actually a smart meter. It's actually the information that a smart meter collects about everything that occurs within your home regarding energy usage. And if you use a technique called non-intrusive activity load monitoring, I can tell what devices you have in your house. I can tell you have a refrigerator. I can even tell when you use them. So for example, if you have an electric hob, I can tell when you come home and when you start dinner. I can tell that you have 5 cups of tea a day. That may be scary to some of you. Maybe the question you want to ask your utility is, what do you do with that data? But I think the other question that we have to ask is if we reduce the polling interval, in other words, if the smart meter reduces the time it uses to ask these devices what's going on, we can even tell what TV shows you're watching. So you imagine a world in maybe 3 to 5 years' time where you get a knock at the door and HBO or a representative of HBO says, why are you watching Game of Thrones season 9 3 weeks before everybody else? It doesn't sound far-fetched, or does it? I mean, you can imagine a world in which the police are using energy records and specifically smart meter data to identify people that are growing marijuana. That doesn't sound so far-fetched because actually they're doing that today but using offline records, in other words, energy consumption. But this approach of peering into our home, it's what I call the last inch, right? Because every other thing that we do in our lives is monitored, is recorded, is captured. The only private domain you have is your home, and now, I'm sorry to say, but that well and truly has gone. And in many cases, that was your decision. That was your decision to buy an Alexa or a Google Home. That was your decision to buy any number of IP-connected devices. But in some cases, they're not. And so all my talks are the most depressing in the world, and like this is really no different because it's depressing and you think, oh my God, there's no end in sight. But there are rays of light. some of those razor light blind me like the light here, but there are companies out there, and I hope companies like yours, if you're in a startup and you're developing something, where you actively can begin to counter this shadow that looms over every single part of our digital world. And the example I'll give you is Boxlock, because, and for those of you that watch Shark Tank, I'm guessing you watch Dragon's Den, but Shark Tank is the US equivalent. They actually presented this on Shark Tank as an IoT-connected padlock. Now, as an IoT-connected padlock, you want to make sure that only you can unlock it. Well, we managed to find a bypass where we can unlock the device using Bluetooth Low Energy. It means anybody can go up to the padlock and just unlock it, which I think you'll agree for a security product is quite a big flaw. Now, we notified them, and within 10 days, they took the vulnerability, analyzed it, developed a patch, rolled it out, and had it in production within 12 days. This is a company that takes security and privacy seriously. And the most incredible part was when I actually tweeted about the vulnerability, they were retweeting the fact that there was a flaw in their products. You know, it shows transparency. It shows a company that understands security and privacy are at the heart of every business. And I think for a padlock or a security company, that's understandable. But I'd like to see a world in which organizations like yourselves, startups like yourselves, implement a vulnerability disclosure policy. Actually reward researchers who find flaws in the products and then fix them, and then are open and transparent about it. This is the new way to do business. Threatening researchers, and actually yesterday I got a legal threat from a CTO of a large company who said, if you publish your research, we'll sue you. And I said, fine, I'll tweet it then. You know, if you use threats to try to protect your intellectual property, but avoid people who are publishing research, it will come out and it will look worse. The only thing you have to control is how you look when the research comes out. And we have to begin to address this because, and I hate the word cyber war because I think it's rhetoric, but the reality is that there are countries all across the world using digital as a means to spy on each of us. And it's not just the large countries that you think of. This is a map of customers for active spyware being sold by commercial companies. And they're countries like Turkmenistan and Mongolia and, you know, countries that you never would have thought would have a digital arm of offensive cyber. You know, like Lily Allen says, everybody's doing it, right? I can't believe I quoted Lily Allen. There goes my reputation. But there's the reality of the world that we live in. Whether it's criminals, whether it's large companies, whether it's nations, our data has enormous, incredible value, and I would argue certainly more than chocolate. And the world around us is changing to the extent that even things like the Winter Olympics are being hacked and being compromised. You have the opportunity to be able to change the message. You can approach it like we used to, but the reality is, I think, and as Facebook have shown, companies that try to safeguard cybersecurity by giving away data, I think, will be impacted significantly. Thank you. Is that it? Is that it? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
First of all, a passion for businesses that create impact and commercial success by talking to and serving women. I'm president of a refinery. We're a media company for women, talking to over 400 million women a month across all of our channels. But I'm not here to talk about that today. I'm here as fangirl number one, a product that I love, a business I admire, and a founder I think is absolutely spectacular. So I will let you introduce Elvie and tell everyone a bit more about it, if that's okay.
Thank you, Kate. Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Bowler. And just over 5 years ago, I started Elvie, which is all about developing smarter technology for women. If you think about it, when you think about consumer electronics or tech, and you think about women, There wasn't much innovation. It was often, turn it into a piece of jewelry, focus on the aesthetic, change the color. And it wasn't really recognizing that because we're in such a PC world, men and women are actually very different, and women go through very specific life stages, everything from menstruation through to pregnancy, postnatal, menopause, and all these huge life changes that women go through are completely neglected when it came to technology. So for us, it was about harnessing the best of technology and developing products that solve problems for women. So we've launched 2 connected devices. The first is a pelvic floor trainer. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with that.
Yeah, how many people know what a pelvic floor is? Show of hands. Yeah, I mean, not that many of you is the answer to that. How many men in the audience know what a pelvic floor is? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I mean, if there are 20 of you, I'm surprised. Yeah. So we'll talk more about that in a little bit.
But did you know what your pelvic floor was 5 years ago?
Listen, my pelvic floor, in my case, and maybe this is TMI, but let's go with it. It's one of those you don't know what you've got until it's gone kind of things for me, to be honest. But thanks to Elvie, I'm getting it back. I had a baby. It's a disaster. But now I do. But I kind of wish I'd known before.
Yeah, so basically, my background, I have a PhD in sexual reproductive health. I've always worked on taboo, neglected issues in health, so everything from HIV prevention to access safe abortion. And it was when I became a mum myself and I realized there's so much focus on the baby's health and wellness and nothing about what's happening to us women. I didn't know anything about my pelvic floor. I was in a Pilates class and my instructor said to me, Tanya, the most important thing you need to do as a woman is look after your pelvic floor. And obviously, as I'm a scientist, I started reading through all the literature, and the numbers are just completely staggering. I mean, 50% of all women will get prolapse. 10% of all women will need surgery at some point in their lives. And from a public health perspective, there's a very simple solution, which is exercise. So it's all about trying to identify why are women not exercising. And the more I looked at it, I realized that technology has really left women behind. So what best in class was this horrible medical device. Women have to go to the hospital, there's a vaginal probe, there's electrodes, there's a screen, and as you contract your pelvic floor, you can start seeing how you're doing. So the kind of simple idea was, why can't we take this horrible, neglected, torturous medical device and turn it into something that women actually want to use at home? I'm not an engineer, but in some ways, thinking about it from a user, blank piece of paper, how would you like this product to work? If it could, give me the confidence on how to exercise, make it fun, make it personal, treat it like any other type of exercise. So we completely innovated in this product that we created. But I think because of my background in public health as well, I realized the topic of today's session is all about taboo. You can't launch a new product category into taboo health area unless you also start focusing on changing the language and changing the way that we can accept and talk about this issue. So for us, it was also a matter of launching what was typically a medical device as a lifestyle product. So not focusing on the yucky health issues like bladder problems or prolapse, and launching it with Refinery 29, launching it with Goop, launching it through boutique gyms so that it became something kind of cool and more mainstream.
And we're talking, we wanted to talk about taboos, and you've, Elvie is now raised more than any other femtech company, which is absolutely extraordinary. You're going to quintuple revenue this year, I read, which is just a brilliant word in of itself, and brilliant. So what's it like building a product and a business around something that is taboo even for women, but I imagine is often completely unknown to some of the men that I'm assuming that you're raising money from?
I mean, this whole taboo, you have to sort of unpack what we mean by taboo in healthcare. And, because I've heard some investors say now that taboo is a new investment thesis because it can create, explosive growth opportunities. And it really depends where the social now seems fairly pedestrian. So, for example, at the very beginning, our product goes inside the vagina. I used to have to go to talk to investors who are obviously mostly male, and I didn't feel I could say that word, but now I feel more comfortable because things are changing really quickly. But there's still many areas taboo health. Funny enough, even though women's health is neglected, male intimate health is highly neglected too. You're not necessarily going to have men talk about the fact they have erectile dysfunction or intimate problems like that.
But how, it must have been at times challenging, sort of saying, here's the product, look at it, touch it, with that layer of extra education that you're having to do, as well as to build a business and launch products.
Yeah, I think, as my co-founder Alex Asali once said, the trait of an entrepreneur is to be quite naive. I think if I'd known how complicated it would be, that we were innovating with the product, we were innovating in how we wanted to launch it, Plus, it's hardware, which is not easy to find investment for. But yeah, in the early stages, I mean, I think ultimately there's 3 buckets of different types of investment. We raised a lot of non-dilutive government grant money, which is obviously they'll be looking much more at the science there, and there's clear clinical evidence on why our product should offer a better solution. And then you have the angel investors, which I think, again, is such a binary proposition. You know, a lot of people just thought it was a bit weird and a bit crazy. And, you know, a lot of people ask me, how is it raising money from male investors? But a lot of the male investors we talk to obviously have wives and daughters and children, so they're indirectly very familiar with women's health issues. So we managed to really get a lot of very supportive angels. And then the VCs, you know, to be honest, like 3-4 years ago, they were just like, Elvie, too niche. You know, even I kept saying women 51% of the population. But I knew the VCs would always be sort of the last to kind of come along. And I think with any entrepreneurs out there, you know, when you get rejected, you just need to take it on the chin and work out, you know, what are their reasons. And they were quite clear. They were like, Tanya, you're never going to get anybody to talk about Elvie publicly. You're never going to get into retail. You're never going to get any traction. So you just kind of go away and you just kind of have to prove yourself on those things. So yeah, off the back of that, we raised our Series A from Octopus, who did take quite a gamble with us. But I think what they saw was there was a much bigger opportunity for women's health. You know, pelvic floor is one issue. You definitely need patient capital, because even though the latent demand is there, it's going to take time, as you said, to educate the markets. But the second product that we launched, which was basically, once we were working on pelvic floor health, when I looked around, I realized that all technology products have been very inherently badly designed for women. They've been left behind, they're lacking the latest in technology, they're not user-designed, user-centered. And actually what epitomized it more than anything is the breast pump. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with the breast pump. Again, a product category that nobody really thinks about, has been neglected, it's a women's issue, it's an intimate part of the body, and yet it's a critical, important product for new mums.
Yeah, I mean, I think if those of you who have used a breast pump, I mean, those of you who've pumped at work, I pumped at work, it sounded like I was having a meeting with a Boeing 747 / kind of milk factory. And it, you know, it was, you know, I have no regrets, and I did it, and it was fine. But I think, you know, what's interesting, and I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask was, you know, we're here at Unbound, and we're talking about tech, and we're talking about startups and raising money, but actually I think what you're also doing is changing culture and behavior, both for the individual woman, the person that uses your products, and I guess the wider society. Can you talk to me a bit about that, and maybe through the breast pump example, but how are you trying to change behavior, and how does technology fuel that change of behavior?
Yeah, so I suppose when I started 3-4 years ago, obviously wearable tech, everybody was very excited about the potential of wearable tech, having, you know, tech sector gone through a fairly agnostic period in terms of their approach to hardware, but then seeing the potential, obviously, with connected devices, with accessing real-time data about your health and wellness through your phone. Massive surge, I think, really what you saw, where it was all about almost like an arms race, like get as many sensors into your wearable tech product. Let's track as many body functions as possible, with the hope that somehow, if you have a big enough data set and it's powerful enough algorithms, at some point you'll be able to make insight around that. And I think that's why it hasn't really taken off yet in the way people expected, because ultimately, as those of you who've got activity trackers will know, maybe you're interested in how many steps you've taken, but once you've learned that, it's nice to know it's not necessarily solving a problem for you. So in some ways, what I say is that potential of tech to change behaviors and how we think about our bodies, I think it's still there, but it hasn't been realized yet. But I think it works better when it's a much more specific use case. So for example, with Elvie Trainer, our first product, we're solving a very specific issue for women, which is pelvic floor weakness. And actually it allows, so the product, basically we didn't explain, there's a hardware device, it's like a pod. You insert it inside the vagina and it connects to your app. And then as you squeeze and exercise, you can actually visualize your pelvic floor in real time. So you set yourself 5-minute workouts, you set yourself goals, you can see yourself improve. And that technology actually allows women to understand their bodies in a much more intimate way. Like women will often tell us to start laughing or crying because it's a part of their body that, because of the taboo, that we can't talk about that, part of our bodies, suddenly they're more connected to it. So I definitely think, you know, Elvie Trainer is an example of how women can understand and appreciate womanhood more than before.
But it's also amazing that because the product is beautiful, because it's brilliantly conceived, because it looks great because you can have it in your bathroom cabinet and you don't think, what's that? Although my husband thought it was, at one point he picked it up and he thought it was a USB charger that to recharge phone. I was like, no, babe, no. But because of that, actually what's been interesting is when my friends have been pregnant, I'm like, get your Elvie now. You've got to get it. It's amazing. It's beautiful. Here's the link. In a way that it's a product that I think is as beautiful and delightful as other products, whether it's my iPhone or whatever other things that I choose to invest in. So I think there is the element of design and building a lifestyle brand as well as solving a medical and through technology. I think it's the combination of those that for me is really changing how women talk to each other. Because I think if it looked horrible and I didn't feel proud to have discovered it, I don't know if I would recommend it as readily.
No, you're right. There's never been, if you think about it, it's kind of crazy. There's never been a technology brand for women. You know, the female consumer of tech has just been underserved for a very long time. And I think what we've shown with Elvie is that you can have really good tech. And we're showing that women are early and avid adopters of tech, but they also like the aesthetic too. You can have both of those together. It doesn't have to be either or. I think this is absolutely critical for tech for women, but actually it's also a general problem with medical devices, you know, that they're not designed around a consumer. And if you can kind of take a more of an Apple or Dyson approach to a lot of medical devices, you'll get a lot more, not only just commercial success, but obviously more adherence and buy into the brand.
And, you know, probably last question, we're talking about, you know, wanted to mention this idea of taboo, and we're talking about a company that's very focused on solving problems for a particular audience, but you're building a company that presumably has men and women working for you, or people who don't define by gender. How does that work? How do you think about attracting talent into the business and connecting everyone to the mission and the purpose of Elvie, even if it's something that they might not use themselves?
Yeah, well, in the early days, you know, we were, everybody thought we were crazy. We were developing a vagina tech product. So it was very binary, as in a lot of people didn't, you know, you could even tell when you're recruiting somebody to interview, if they don't want to touch your product or go near it, you know, they're not going to fit in very well in the company. But on the flip side, you end up attracting really passionate evangelists, and actually end up with a lot of very passionate young women who are not necessarily thinking about health issues or motherhood, but for them it's a strong women's rights issue, as in, you know, they're just angry that women have had to put up with bad technology, and it's always about bringing in that passion in those young people and achieving amazing things with that group. Now, as we've got bigger, now that we've expanded the product range, it's been very easy to bring in great talent, both for men and women, because these days, as we all know, people want to work for more mission-led companies. And particularly, actually, we've been hiring great women from Google, from Apple, from Dyson, because often they'll be in a more male-dominated tech company, and actually they'll be more attracted to coming working at Elvie.
Yeah, that's great. I think it is the fusion of those things. I think we see a similar thing at Refinery 29. So before we wrap, a thought finally on taboo. Taboo's a buzzword. Lots of people are raising on the idea of taboo. Should we not use that word? And while we're talking about words that might not be useful, is femtech a useful word?
Yeah. I mean, it's true, taboo is suddenly trendy, and I think it's a positive thing because we're shining light on lots of areas, issues in society that we haven't been able to talk about. So everything from insomnia to mental health to male health. I think it's good in general. That's a passion of mine in terms of trying to break some of the taboos, but obviously it needs a bit of unpacking. You know, it's, for example, death. In our society, we don't talk about death. It's not necessarily going to be an explosive growth opportunity, because if you have an issue that's still very negative, it's not going to take off in an organic way because people won't share. You know, my view is people only share when something's very positive. So with Elvie, we've only managed to get that kind of explosive growth by literally switching the language around and making it much more positive. But yeah, absolutely, taboo in some ways equals neglect. It means an issue that's been neglected, which means opportunity. So I think it's exciting that the investment community is actually realizing, whereas before they'd be like, this is too difficult, I don't want to go near there, and realizing it's difficult, but the potential upside is really big, and hopefully that's what we've shown with Elvie.
And femtech as a word that you embrace, or a word that is challenging as well as...
I embrace it from that. You know, with investors, it's always about pattern recognition. They want to know that when they invest in a sector that there's going to be follow-on money. 5 years ago, it was like, what is pelvic floor? What's women's health? Is this an issue? Now you've got different startups. We've had Clue and Natural Cycles in Europe. We've Maven in the US. They've all been raising good money. They're all focusing on different life stages for women with different product offerings, but all together we can kind of band together and say, this is femtech, and that creates, that becomes something. And consumers like it too. Women like the fact that tech products are being designed for them now. The female consumer controls more than 85% of spending when it comes to both health tech and technology in the household.
Female, 85% of all consumer spending by women, and all of our research shows that they are more likely to spend and continue to spend with products and brands that they believe in and that speak to them uniquely.
And I was just going to add, to our breast pump, which we launched just late last year. So the main incumbent, they make 600 million a year revenue from their product they've not innovated in for a long time. We knew our product was superior, but we thought, it's going to take us time and marketing spend to get there. Within 4 weeks, we've displaced them, and we're now #1 in the UK. It's that quick, because if you offer women something which really gives a really big advantage, actually, the adoption is just insane.
Well,
insanely.
Phenomenal story, commercial success and innovation, beautiful design, branding, and something that genuinely solves problems for women. It's truly, truly inspiring to hear about it. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you all for listening. We have 6.5 seconds left, so we're on time. That's good. Mark will be pleased. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks.